Tansei, Tanishi, Buju. Welcome to Season 3 of the Traveling Métis podcast, the podcast that dives into Métis culture. Do you hear that? That is the sound of the river, which can only mean one thing. It is time to grab your paddle and your headphones and hop into your canoe, because we are heading down the river to talk to our fellow Michif storytellers. Welcome back, my Michif-loving listeners. We have spent the past 3 episodes diving into some important ways to communicate our stories, whether that be filmmaking, art installations, or super cool XR technologies. And we are back with another way to rile up the youth with a conversation with children's book author Willie Poll. We want to throw back to last season when we focused on speaking to Métis people living in Ontario. And although I did discuss the Powley case and the beautifully terrifying waters of Lake Superior, I didn't get the chance to speak on probably the most famous Métis community in Ontario, Sault Ste. Marie, the home community of our guest today. As we know, we are all shaped by the land and communities in which we are birthed. Having been to Sault Ste. Marie, I can tell you they are a fierce Michif group with hearts of gold, fighting for Indigenous rights throughout history, all the way from the Mica Bay incident to the Powley case. Willie Poll is definitely a Sioux Michif to the core, shaping the minds of youth with children's books like Minnow, Together We Drum, Our Hearts Beat as One, and My Little Ogichidaa, plus another book that you can pre-order, so stick around and we'll tell you more about that one in Willie's interview. I did want to mention a few things before we start. My conversation with Willie embodies everything I wanted to do with this season of the podcast, highlighting the importance of storytelling, especially now when we're living in such divisive times. I always tell people the importance of learning the story of not only their home community, but the story of your family. Because no matter what happens in this world, no one can take that from you. Those stories run deep through our DNA, and our ancestors fought so that we could be here to tell them. I wasn't fortunate enough to grow up with my grandparents due to the fact that my family doesn't have a long shelf life. Watch yourself for diabetes and maybe don't work in a coal mine. But our next guest, Willie Poll, was lucky enough to be able to sit down and hear stories from her grandfather. This undoubtedly shaped the stories that they tell today. All right, Willie, so thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I just wanted to know, since you're an author and storyteller, how your heritage and Métis culture, or just being Indigenous, impacts your storytelling.
I think that a lot of my storytelling is rooted in my own family and like my own family stories, and also rooted in people who've inspired me in my life. So I would say it's like almost like a 2-part question. There's a lot of me and like my grandpa, especially within my stories, and my mom and my aunts and my cousins. And I come from like a very blended background. Like a lot of my cousins my niece and nephew are First Nation. And so my stories kind of have both like a Métis and a First Nation feel through a lot of them. Especially like I have a book coming out called Our Ancestors' Kitchen, which has a lot of different like Métis motifs in it, I guess. Like the Métis flag is in it, and there's like different things are embedded in it, and it's about food sovereignty. And that one is like really draws from like my home territory, like Sault Ste. Marie. It really, draws from a lot of my family who go moose hunting every fall, and our traditions there. And so I think it's just there's so many different pieces, but like I've worked in First Nations education the last like 10 plus years. And I've worked a lot in the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit space. And so like my first book I wrote while I was living in a community near the Highway of Tears. And so like that story, I would say almost grounded in that community of like me being there and at the time being part of the community and like seeing these signs after signs on this highway of missing people. I just like went home and like immediately wrote this story. And so it's weird because like every different book that I have is grounded in like a completely different experience and inspired by completely different people. And so there's like bits of my home and also bits of like everywhere in Turtle Island where I've been part of community and I've been, working and inspired by the youth.
Are there any specific stories that are maybe Indigenous or not that were passed down to you that maybe inspired you to become a storyteller?
My grandpa was like a super storyteller, comedian. Like I never knew like if what he was saying was like serious or like not serious. Like he just was show. Like he was just the show. And I think like there is one story growing up that he would always talk about how my great great grandma was born in a canoe. And like, I honestly thought he was joking. Like, I did not think that that was like true. And then I think it was in like the Blind River Museum. We found this article about our family and it like referenced her being the only like known person born in a canoe in North America. And my grandpa had already passed at this time. And I remember being like, what? Like, he wasn't joking. And so it like kind of pushed me to like look into some of the other stories that he would like tell and talk about and like figure out like basically figure out our family history, like actually map it out and like look at it. And that's been like really cool to do, I guess. Like there was like a lot of our family history that was like lost. And my grandpa like really rarely specifically talked about being Indigenous. Like he very rarely kind of brought it up. And I think like there was a lot of shame. And I know when he was a kid, like his family used to tell him to like pretend that he was Latino, like pretend he was Mexican because it was like better than being Indigenous. And so I think like we lost so much of our stories that like being together has been really fun and interesting. Yeah. But that one like always stands out. And like my family had really close ties to the fur trade and worked for the HBC. And so there's like a lot of stories of like canoe trips and big voyages. And to me, that translates as like these like big adventures. And so as a storyteller, like I'm always like, okay, how do we like show that,
I think a lot of Indigenous people can relate to sort of like your culture being lost. And your books are geared towards like youth and young people. So why is it important that, you pass down this knowledge and share these stories with the youth?
I think for me, like I never really saw any Indigenous books when I was a kid. And like I feel like the only Indigenous representation I had as a child was like Western movies, which is obviously like such poor representation, but like my grandpa loved them. And I think that part of the reason he loved them is because he was able to see some piece of him in it, right? Like even if it was inaccurate, even if it was like blatantly racist at times, like it was more than what he had. Like, and I think, I want to create things where people see themselves in it. Like I want my niece and nephew to be able to pick up a book and like be like, yeah, that's us. Like that's our family. Like that's our life. That's our language. And I think too, like I want to raise awareness. Like a lot of my books talk about really big issues. Like my first book, Together We Drum, Our Hearts Beat as One, raises awareness for missing and murdered Indigenous people. And, there isn't something like that in kids' books. but Indigenous kids are dealing with these issues, right? Like there's 5-year-olds in kindergarten who know that their mom is missing or know that their auntie is missing or have had a relative be murdered. And so if Indigenous kids are having to deal with these issues, then at the very least, we can raise awareness and plant seeds for, good allyship in other kids.
A lot of your books feature Indigenous women, and you talked about like missing and murdered Indigenous women as well. Why is it important to highlight Indigenous women's experiences as well for you?
I don't have the statistics right in front of me, but like I can definitely Google them. Most books feature boys, and even books about talking animals almost always are boy talking animals. And so in general, there are not enough books with girl or gender diverse protagonists. And so I think for me, like one, I have a niece. I also have a nephew, but he's the youngest. So when I first started writing books, I only had my 2 nieces. And so I think for me, like it just felt really natural to write protagonists that center them and their experience. And now that I have a nephew, I actually find it kind of difficult to like try and center his, because it's like for me as a woman, I feel like that's been so natural to do. But I think like there isn't enough stories that are empowering for girls. And we still see so much of like a gender bias in like girls' clothing and girls' books. And like, she's the princess, she's the damsel in distress. And like, I just didn't want that. Like Indigenous women are so powerful, so knowledgeable. They pass down languages, culture, recipes. Like we see a huge divide with missing and murdered Indigenous women, because what's happening is like they're being taken out of the equation. And so things that women normally would pass down are not being passed down to generations of all of these families who are missing their matriarchs or missing their future matriarchs. And so I think it was just really important to me to like showcase the beauty and the brilliance of our matriarchs. Like they really keep the community together. And, I come from a family of strong women, and yeah.
So for the book, My Little Ogichidaa, you credit the Moose Hide campaign, and there's this like beautiful space in the book that you have where they're wearing like the pins, and you talk a bit about it, but like infusing that activism in like a digestible way for these youth and these kids, because like you said, they're watching the news, they know what's happening in their communities, and to have your book sort of explain it to them in a way that's like maybe a talking point that like their parents read them the book, and now they can learn a bit more about these things happening in the community.
Yeah, I think so. I have a close relationship with the Moose Hide campaign. I've been working for them for a few years, and I found them initially through my first book, and I just fell in love with their mission. And, I fell in love with the like founding family of the campaign and their story. And so basically it's a grassroots Indigenous organization, and their symbol is like the little moose hide pin that they wear. And for every moose hide pin you wear, you start like 5 conversations about violence. And so it's really about like bringing the topic out of the shadows, because it's something that, we don't often talk about, especially like within domestic violence. Like it's something that we kind of shush, and, it stays in the family, and we just don't talk about it. And in order to end violence, I think that we have to have those real conversations. And so I knew that for My Little Ogichidaa, like I wrote it after watching the founder of the campaign, Raven Lacerte. She and her dad started the campaign when Raven was only about 16. And a couple years ago, I watched her speak in front of like a few thousand people, and she had her oldest daughter beside her, and her youngest daughter was in the womb, just growing. So she was like, had a big pregnant belly, and her toddler beside her holding her hand on stage. And I just remember thinking like, that's what decolonizing spaces looks like. Moms being able to be up there and being a mother, because as a society, like we shame motherhood. Like we don't want you to breastfeed in public. Like we don't want you to take your kids to class. Like we don't make it accessible for moms to be successful. And that's like not the Indigenous way, like, at all. That's such a colonial thing. And so for me, like in that moment, I just thought like, what an absolutely powerful Indigenous woman to be up there doing that and speaking at the same time while thousands of people are listening, while she talks about the topic of gender-based violence. And so when I went home, I just started writing this poem. And yeah, they turned into my little Ogichidaa, which means my little warrior. And yeah, so it was in part like I had the Moosehide campaign woven into it, especially because the story was really about Raven and her raising these future matriarchs and these future leaders and future like little warriors, and just like the knowledge and the power, like the intergenerational power passed down in that moment of them looking up at their mom, speaking on this stage, like having a platform that Indigenous women haven't had before. Like, it's only recent that we've been given any kind of platform.
There's a little bit of like sprinkled of residential school in there, and all these other issues that are going through too. And I think that's such a great way to have like this conversation with not only Indigenous youth, but for non-Indigenous people who are reading it to their kids, just because the younger you start the conversations, like as they grow older, the more they're able to digest and have these sort of conversations about like the history of Indigenous people here. So it's really great to see that in your book.
Well, I think for me, like my little Ogichidaa really is about interweaving the past, present, and future. Like it's about looking at motherhood and how, motherhood comes from our ancestors. It is what's happening right now, and it is raising the future. And so bringing in some of the intergenerational trauma, but also the intergenerational power and knowledge, and just like our hopes and dreams for the future, and reframing what a warrior is. Like a warrior is someone who, tries to learn their language or picks medicine or learns to dance. And there's just all of these really beautiful things interwoven in it, because like for Indigenous kids, like their existence is so beautiful. Like they are warriors just by existing in a colonial world that, sought destruction and genocide. And so I think that it's just, yeah, it was a really, really interesting journey to interweave so many different topics like activism or social justice or whatever we want to call it within, just the Indigenous realities within it. And so, yeah, it's one of my favorite books. I wrote it for moms. It's really interesting because it's my only book that I really wrote for parents. And it's a children's book. And I always feel bad saying that because I think from like a marketing perspective, I probably shouldn't say that. I think publishers wouldn't want that as much, but I wrote it for parents, and that's kind of the target audience. And I think that parents don't give themselves enough credit, and parents often always feel like they're doing a terrible job and they're not good enough. And there's so much pressure today, like, to make these elaborate lunches and like do all these like crazy things. And I see it with my friends who are having kids. And, I just think that I wanted something that also told parents that like they are doing an incredible job and like they're enough and they're powerful too.
Because we know like we're not only in our mother's womb, but like since our mother's eggs, like we're in our grandmother's wombs as well. So like it's a really nice book. For when I read it, it reminded me of like, oh, like we are our ancestors. Like we're not just here for this generation. We were growing in our grandmother's wombs as well, right? So it's just that like interconnectedness that you had of like we are our trauma, but we're also all these other great things that our ancestors were. And you're right, like the fact that we're just here existing and celebrating our culture is just honoring them. And it's, yeah, really great. I really loved the book. And I don't even have kids, but it just like made me feel more connected to like like my mother and my grandmother who I didn't get to grow up with. So it was just like, oh, like no matter where we are in our lives, like we're carrying all this stuff with us. So it was really beautiful. Yeah, and the title is, Anishinaabe-Moan. So yeah, maybe you could talk a bit about the importance of infusing that language into your work.
My great-grandfather was a fluent speaker of Anishinaabe-Moan, and I think it's kind of come like this weird full circle. Like my niece went to a First Nations daycare, and she is probably like the first generation in my family to have any kind of Indigenous like education from that young. And so when I go home, like she saw this like huge bear and like she called it Mi'kwa, and I just like I was like crying because I just wasn't expecting that. And like me and my brother, like we aren't fluent speakers. Like I have taken some courses and like obviously would like love to. I don't think my brother's pursued it like at all. But I, just seeing her speaking any of her language was so powerful for me, and like really also made me realize that like we need more resources, and like there isn't enough in books, and even just having like a few words or pieces, like it's difficult because my books rhyme, and it's definitely hard to rhyme other languages when you have written it in one language, like even to translate it into French or something is challenging. So it's become like increasingly important for me to include more language and like continue that growth for kids, because I think like they're there and they want it and they're learning it, and I don't think we're keeping up with them. And so yeah, I think it's incredibly important, and there's so much knowledge embedded within Indigenous languages, like it's medicines, plants, like all of that knowledge is embedded in language, and it would be awful to lose it. So I'm happy that, so many languages are being revitalized.
Have you been able to see any impacts? I'm sure when you release a book and you go out and you get to see people, have you seen any of like the impacts your stories have had on the community or youth, or even like this book you said was for parents? Have you been able to see the impact that you've had?
Yeah, a lot of people cry. And I think for me, like, especially with my little Ogichidaa, I cried a lot at first. Like, it took me a long time to be able to read it without crying or like without being in tears. And so I find that a lot of people are touched by the books in different ways and they mean different things to them. And so I do get a lot of people at readings, like parents. Kids, I feel like it's always funny. Like when I read a book, kids are like, yeah, I love the pictures. And I'm like, yeah, I know, so do I. But yeah, I find that kids like they pick out what they want from it. And like often it's the animals. Like often they're like, I like how this page has a frog. Cool, that's so awesome. I love that. And like they're planting like little seeds, but it's like the parents who like fully understand the whole picture, right? Who like have already know about residential school, or already know about missing and murdered Indigenous people. And sometimes I have people bring me gifts, like people I don't know come to book launches and like bring me like beadwork and earrings and like just these beautiful things that took so much time, and like it's so meaningful to me, and it like caught me so off guard, I think. It's just what I never would have expected, that something I wrote would impact someone in a way that they felt like they wanted to gift me something. Like it's just really beautiful. And so like there's a lot of times where like then I'm crying and we're just all crying. But I don't know, it's hard to see. And with social media, it's interesting too, because like I get to see a lot of different posts or like libraries or people review the books and stuff, and that's really cool. And I read all the reviews. Like I'll like frequently go on Goodreads and Amazon and stuff just to like see when new reviews pop up. Like yeah, so I like to think that they are making at least a small ripple of difference. Even and even if it's just a couple of people, it's worth it.
But I think like for that impact to be seen like 10 years down the line, like I know things like for me as a kid, like when we had an Indigenous person come in, like a First Nations man come into our class, and I still remember that to like this day. Like of course it was only one day of Indigenous history and learning about Indigenous people, but like that to this day like still impacts me and things like that. So I think for the parents you're seeing that right now, but like for the youth it's like 10 years down the line or 20 years. Like I'm 30 years old and I still remember like third grade when that man came in, right? So I think those impacts we probably won't see until down the line, but definitely seeing yourself represented in a book is like a big deal, I think. When a non-Indigenous like reader picks up your book and either reads it to their kid and things like that, what are you hoping that they get out of the book as well? Because obviously for Indigenous people, seeing yourself represented is important, but for those non-Indigenous children who are getting to learn and read from your books, what do you hope they're taking away?
I mean, all of my books were definitely written for an Indigenous audience. So that was like never something I thought of until I got asked it like after. And then so like I had to pause and be like, oh, like I never really thought about that. But like I think just, all my books are very different, but I think they all bring awareness to certain topics. Like Minnow is very like land back and like environmental activism and Indigenous science. And I think like I just want people to see how incredibly powerful Indigenous folks are and like Indigenous nations, and just know that like I think the future of the earth, like the future of the future of Turtle Island is about land back and is about Indigenous people taking the lead, um, in those spaces. And so I think I just want more allyship and like more action. Like I think a lot of my books are rooted in action. Like there's like protest scenes within my books and things like that. And like I think that we focus often on like truth and reconciliation as like one day or like reading a book or doing like one little thing. And it's like, it's not, it's really about putting in that work every day and like finding new ways to support Indigenous people. And I think that, I would like to inspire that in the younger generation, and hopefully be able to see change going forward.
Like you said, like the sooner you can teach young people about like other communities that they're not from, right? And especially like Indigenous people, like you said, like truth and reconciliation kind of, you have to have both sides working together. You can't just have it on the Indigenous people to say like, hey, like these are our needs and we're going to need some allies to help with that.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. Like I've been, watching a lot of like different, like kids book influencers speak about Ogichidaa lately, and like what they're getting out of it is sometimes so different than anything I could have imagined. Like I've had a couple people highlight it and make a really strong parallel between like my little Ogichidaa and the 40 some moms giving birth in Palestine every day right now. And like that's not a connection I would have ever made, but once they made that and I saw how like elegantly they spoke about it, it also sparked me to realize that I also have to do more in different spaces. Like how can I support Palestinian mothers more? Because obviously my book is like has parallels to what's happening there and people are making that reference, and like maybe that's like like a little nudge, like what more can I do? I think it also sparks me to kind of put my money where my mouth is, so to speak, and like it's one thing to write about something, but how am I living every day in a way that aligns with what I write about and what I'm asking others to do?
Motherhood is like a universal and story, right? So it's like the power of women and women's rights and women's issues across the planet. Like I definitely think, yeah, any mother reading this, obviously it's an Indigenous woman from Turtle Island, but I think, yeah, any woman anywhere can kind of relate to everything that you're experiencing when you're pregnant is passed on to your child, right? So it's just, yeah, great that people were able to make like those bigger connections as well. But yeah, maybe we could talk about on a lighter note, the pretty pictures that the children love, because you've collaborated with some pretty great, like these books are beautiful, like some pretty great illustrators. Maybe you could talk about the collaboration process with them and how that's been.
So I have like no artistic vision at all. Like I can't even like really draw stick people. So often when I write something, like I had no idea how publishing a book worked at all until the first one, right? Like no, it was like not on my radar at all. And it just kind of happened. And like, I don't know, luck or something aligned and it happened, it worked out. But like I had no idea how it would all work. And so when they, asked me like, well, what do you want on each page? I was like, what? Like, I don't know. Like, I have no idea. Like, I literally cannot envision it at all. And so I was super blessed with my first book to have Chief Ladybird, because she's obviously like an incredibly talented artist who, loved the story and had a lot of artistic vision for the story on her own. I think that, she brought just things that I would have never thought of or imagined into the story. Like I just couldn't have dreamed that up. And it's a really beautiful process because basically I get to see my story in a whole different way. And so it like doesn't, it like, then it becomes like our story. Like, it's like, oh, okay, you saw this in the story and drew this. And that is like more incredible than anything I could have imagined. And now that's like your story and my story. It's like this weird, it's like a really cool mixture of two mediums. And I think that's why I love kids' books so much, because like it's the only thing where you really get that mix of like two different creatives and two, you know, different pieces of art coming together. And so, you know, that book will always be like my baby. It was my first book. The artwork in all my books are super different. My little Ogichidaa, like Holly Pitchett, is also just so incredible, like an incredible woodland artist. The woodland designs in everything, like including like the little toad is like a woodland drawn. And I just was like, oh my God, that's the cutest little toad I've ever seen. I just loved it, you know, and it's so powerful, like the baby and the stars and like bringing in kind of like the spirit world and, you know, stories of the baby being in the spirit world, choosing its parents, and like all those things are like kind of interwoven within the art. And I just think it's incredibly powerful. I think also, you know, she's a mom and probably brought some of her own story within that. And so, yeah, it's just, you know, I am always blown away by the artists I get to work with. Like, they truly do an incredible job that I could never do. And like, they make the story. Like, a kid's book would be nothing without the art.
Yeah, and maybe we could talk about what you have coming up, something new that people might be able to check out from you.
My next book will officially release, but it goes for pre-sales this fall. And it's called Our Ancestors' Kitchen. And it's my first non-rhyming picture book, actually, which is kind of exciting. And it is Shakira David illustrated it. And it's like, I want to say like really cute compared to my other books. Like, the artwork is very like cute animation, cartoony characters, and like really soft and like pastel-y. And so the artwork is like, I really love, and it's something very different than my other stories. And it focuses really on like a hunting trip and like food sovereignty and our traditional foods. And it's kind of like these grandparents and their grandchild who are cooking. And then, you know, there's all of these like stories within the food that come to life, like memories and blood memories. And so I think it's really, really beautiful. I'm super excited about it. And it kind of brings in like ancestral connection.
Some of my memories as like a child is in the kitchen with like my mom, right?
Like, a lot of our culture is passed down through food. Like, food is culture. You know, that's the first thing you think of when you think of another culture. Like, if I said like, you know, what do you know about Japanese culture? Like, one of the first things you would think of is like the food. And every culture just has like their own unique food from, you know, from the land in which they are. And so I think it encompasses things like Indigenous science and, you know, respect and honoring the animals and plant life, and knowledge around food. And it has like a lot of Métis specific pieces within it. So I call them like Easter eggs, but it has like Métis, like the flag and Métis sash, like interwoven in different pieces. And so it's really the first book where I've done that and focused it a lot on like my own like family story. And yeah, I'm pretty excited about it.
And of course, people can check that out when it comes out. But is there anywhere else people can find you or your books or anything, anywhere they can go?
You can always find me on my website, williepoll.com. You can follow me on Instagram, William Pug Do Life. And you can find my books like pretty much anywhere books are sold. If it's not in store, they can definitely order it in any of the main places too.
I got my book at the Remy Modern in Saskatoon, so they sell your books the museum there, so they could get them everywhere.
Merci to Willie for sitting down with me to have some important discussions about arming our future Ogichidaa with knowledge. You can grab my little Ogichidaa wherever books are sold near you. If it is not there, make them order it for you. Demand Indigenous content from your local bookstores. Willie's next book, Our Ancestors' Kitchen will be out this spring, but you can pre-order it right now. Did you hear me? Order it right now. And while you are ordering your books, you can grab your little Ogichidaa and set them down for a quick story time. If you are a long-time listener, all the way back to season 1, you know we like to provide you with a little fiction story content. And due to budget cuts, we have been slacking on that. But today, you are in luck. We have a story just for you. If you know anything about Michif culture, you know we are sometimes referred to as children of the fur trade. And as our ancestors traveled along those fur trade routes, I am sure they asked themselves,
"Why am I here? Why did our God bring us to these lands?"
Just as our First Nation kin asked,
"Creator, why did you bring these French or Scottish peoples to our land? Why, Creator, why?"
I am happy to say, after spending time down by the river with some four-legged friends, I was able to find the answers. I bring it here to you today in a story I like to call the story of the new two-legged.
Mr. Beaver, Mr. Beaver, Mr. Beaver, I have a message for you. Mr. Beaver, aren't you tired of lugging those logs around?
I quite like it, actually.
Mr. Beaver!
Okay, I'll rest for a little while then. What is this message?
I have a message from Creator. He wishes to give you a task.
A task? For me? What would Creator want of me?
You are so hardworking and resourceful. There is a change coming, and Creator has a very important task that can only be trusted to you. You must help the two-legged.
What do you think I'm doing? Now leave me be. I must get back to work.
It is not your pawn Creator wishes to gift them with, but a lesson. So you have already gathered with us here in the pond to create peace among the two-legged of this land. The four-legged and two-legged live in harmony with one another, but there will be a new two-legged coming soon. These two-legged aren't like our two-legged. They don't know how to live with us or the land.
Then why are they coming here?
Why do you build your dam?
I don't know.
Creator doesn't give us all the answers, and we keep on living. Are you up for the task or not?
How can I help?
The new two-legged will be here soon. As I said, they do not know how to live with the two-legged of this land. You will need to teach them how to live together.
How will I do that?
Creator has made you creative and wise. Use your gifts to figure that out.
Well, I could bring them together with a common interest. What do they like?
They admire your fur. All of us do.
That is it then.
You will give them your fur?
Now without a fight I won't. They must catch me.
You are cruel, Mr. Beaver. Did you not hear me? I said they do not know how to live off this land.
I'll have our two-legged teach them. They have been here with us for a long time. If they do not know how to catch me by now, then they do not deserve my fur. Tell all my friends to meet me here. We'll need to work together.
What if they destroy you all?
Creator would not let that happen. We have to trust that once our game is done, once the two-legged have learned to live with one another, they will reciprocate all we have done for them.
Well, there you have it, folks. The answer to your existential dread. Why are we here? Straight from Mr. Beaver himself. Join us for the next episode where we talk with up-and-coming Métis filmmaker Andrew Konoff. This episode was written and hosted by Samantha Loney, with music composed by Etienne Beausoleil, edited by Cassidy Villebrun-Baracus, and produced by the Métis and Me program. This podcast was made in support from our sponsors, 880 Cities and the City of Barrie's Arts and Culture Investment Program. Remember to like and subscribe for more content. Merci for listening.